I never imagined that a storm, just a simple storm, would uncover the darkest secret of my life. Not the kind of storm that shakes the earth. No, this one crept in slowly, quiet at first. A steady rain tapping against my windows, whispering something I wasn't ready to hear. I stood there, staring into the night, my chest heavy, my thoughts restless. Something felt off. That deep, gut-wrenching feeling, the kind that tells you life is about to change, but you don't know how. I should have listened to it. Because when the rain finally stopped, when the sun rose the next morning, nothing was the same. I was a good wife. A faithful one. I loved my husband. I did everything right. But love doesn't protect you from loneliness. And loneliness makes you vulnerable. That night, when the wind howled and the power flickered, I wasn't just fighting the storm outside. I was fighting something inside me. Something I thought I had buried. Until my neighbor looked at me in a way I hadn't been looked at in years. I should have walked away. I should have locked the door, turned off the lights, and gone to bed like every other night. But I didn't. And that's where it all began. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted, hit that like button. Subscribe to Shocking Infidelity Saga for more stories like this. And stay until the end, because when I finally confronted my neighbor, I learned the truth. And it was worse than I ever imagined. I was a wife before anything else. A mother. A woman who played by the rules. I woke up early, made breakfast, packed lunches, cleaned up the messes no one else noticed. I smiled when I was supposed to. Laughed at the right moments. Said, I love you, even when I wasn't sure he heard me. My husband, he was a good man once. Or maybe he still was, just not to me. He worked hard, provided, made sure we had everything we needed. Everything except him. He was always busy. Always distracted. Always somewhere else, even when he was right in front of me. Conversations had turned into transactions, quick exchanges of schedules and responsibilities. I tried. God, I tried. I told myself this was normal, that all marriages go through phases. That love wasn't about grand gestures or stolen moments. It was about commitment, about choosing each other even when it didn't feel easy. But what happens when you're the only one choosing? The loneliness crept in slowly, so gradually I didn't even notice it at first. Like a leak in the ceiling, just a few drops here and there, nothing to worry about. Until one day, you look up and the whole thing is caving in. And then there was him. Our neighbor. He wasn't supposed to matter. Just another person in the background of my life. A man with a house 2 doors down, a familiar face at the mailbox, a polite nod in passing. Until one day, I started noticing him. Noticing the way he looked at me. The way his eyes lingered just a second too long. The way his voice softened when he spoke my name. I should have ignored it. Should have laughed it off, convinced myself I was imagining things. But I wasn't. Because he noticed me too. It wasn't in the way he stared, it was in the way he didn't. In the way he paid attention without making it obvious. The way he asked about my day like he actually cared about the answer. The way he remembered little details, things my own husband had long since stopped hearing. And then came the storm. The wind howled through the trees, rain slashing against the windows. The sky cracked open with thunder, the power flickered, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't alone. My husband was gone, another late-night meeting, another excuse. But my neighbor was there, standing at my door. Dripping wet, hair plastered to his forehead, his shirt clinging to his skin. He had come to check on me, to make sure everything was okay. And for the first time in years, someone did. The rain was relentless. Sheets of it crashed against the windows, the wind howling through the trees like something alive, something angry. The lights flickered, casting shadows that stretched and shrank against the walls. I sat alone in the dim glow of a candle, listening to the storm rage outside, feeling the weight of the silence pressing in on me. My husband hadn't called. Not even a message to check in. I wasn't surprised. I had stopped expecting things from him a long time ago. Then a knock. A sharp, sudden rap against the door that sent a jolt through me. I hesitated. Who would be out in this weather? Another knock, firmer this time. I pulled the door open, and there he was. My neighbor. Dripping wet, water running in rivulets down his face, his soaked clothes clinging to his body. His eyes locked onto mine, searching, assessing. "Power's out across the block," he said, voice low, steady. "Wanted to make sure you're okay." I should have said yes, I'm fine. I should have thanked him and shut the door. But I didn't. Instead, I stepped aside. "Come in," I heard myself say. He hesitated for only a second before stepping inside, shaking the rain from his hair. The scent of damp earth and something distinctly him filled the space between us. "I can check the windows, make sure nothing's leaking," he offered, his voice casual, his tone easy. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. We moved through the house together, his presence an unfamiliar weight in a space that had felt so empty for so long. He tested the locks, secured the back door, pressed a hand against the window panes to check for drafts. It was nothing. Just small, practical gestures. Just a neighbor helping another. But I felt it. The awareness. The tension. The way my pulse quickened when he moved too close. And then, in the dim glow of the candlelight, it happened. A gust of wind rattled the house, shaking the bookshelf near the window. A small vase wobbled, tipped over. We both reached for it at the same time. Our hands met. Skin against skin. His fingers brushed mine, warm despite the cold. We both froze. It was barely a touch. Nothing really. But in that moment, it felt like everything. A line being drawn in the dark. His eyes flicked to mine, searching, questioning. I could have pulled away. I should have. But I didn't. Instead, I laughed. A small, breathless sound, the kind that escapes before you can stop it. I hadn't laughed in months. And just like that, something shifted. His lips curled into a slow smile, the kind that sent a quiet thrill down my spine. For a moment, neither of us moved. Neither of us spoke. The storm raged on outside. And inside, something else was beginning. I should have stepped away. I should have laughed it off, made some casual remark, put space between us. But I didn't. I stayed there, my hand still resting against his, the warmth of his skin against mine lingering longer than it should have. Something about that moment felt different, dangerous. I pulled away first, but even as I did, the air between us had shifted. The room felt smaller, the candlelight softer, the shadows deeper. I swallowed hard, forcing a breath, forcing myself to move. I busied my hands, picking up the vase, placing it back on the shelf, anything to break the silence stretching between us. But my mind wouldn't let go. Why did I feel this way? It wasn't as though I had never been touched before. My husband used to touch me once, a long time ago. I used to know the feeling of fingers trailing down my arm, the press of a steady hand at the small of my back. I used to know what it meant to be desired. Used to. Now, I couldn't remember the last time he kissed me like he meant it. Couldn't remember the last time he really looked at me, saw me. Loneliness had become my quiet companion, a dull ache I had learned to carry. Nights spent staring at the ceiling while he slept beside me, inches away yet worlds apart. Mornings filled with empty silence, our conversations reduced to schedules and responsibilities. I told myself it didn't matter, that this was just life, just how things were after years of marriage. But standing there, in the dim glow of the candlelight, my heart racing for reasons I didn't want to admit. I realized it did matter. I stole a glance at him, at the way the flickering light danced across his face. Strong features, eyes that held something unreadable. He wasn't just close, he was too close. My body noticed before my mind could stop it. The heat radiating off of him, the scent of rain and something warm, something undeniably male. My breath caught when he reached out. Just the briefest touch, his fingers brushing the inside of my wrist. Light. Barely there. But enough. Enough to send a quiet shiver through me. I pulled back. Too fast, too sharp. His eyes held mine, questioning. He wasn't pushing. Wasn't forcing. Just waiting. I should have said something. Instead, I turned away. I forced a laugh, hollow and uneasy. Am I overthinking this? It was just a moment. Just a touch. Just a neighbor checking on me in a storm. That's what I told myself. That's what I needed to believe. But deep down, I already knew the truth. This wasn't nothing. And whatever this was, it wasn't over. The lights flickered once, twice, then the house plunged into complete darkness. A silence followed, thick and heavy, broken only by the steady pounding of rain against the windows and the low rumble of thunder in the distance. I exhaled slowly, willing my heartbeat to steady. "It's out everywhere," he said, his voice low in the dark. I nodded, though he couldn't see me. The only light now came from the small candle on the coffee table, its flickering flame casting shadows that stretched and swayed across the walls. I felt him shift, closer than he should be. I should have moved away, created space, cleared my head. Instead, I stayed rooted to the spot, my fingers gripping the edge of the table as if grounding myself against something far more dangerous than the storm outside. Then he spoke. Soft, careful. "I don't think he appreciates you the way he should." The words settled between us, heavier than the air, heavier than anything else in that moment. I froze. A sharp breath in. A pause. Something inside me twisted at the sound of them, something deep, something raw. Because wasn't that what I had been waiting to hear? To be seen? To be noticed? To have someone say out loud what I had been trying to silence for so long? I swallowed hard, my throat tight. "You shouldn't say that," I whispered. But it wasn't anger in my voice. It wasn't even resistance. It was something closer to fear. Not of him. Of myself. Because the truth was, I wanted to hear it. I wanted him to say it again. And he knew it. He shifted back slightly, as if realizing what he had just done, what line he had stepped over. The flickering candlelight caught the edge of his face, jaw clenched, eyes unreadable. Thunder rolled outside, loud enough to shake the windows. But the only sound I could hear was the pounding of my own heart. For a second, neither of us moved. Then he took a step toward the door. He was leaving. I should have let him. Should have turned away, let this moment disappear into the dark like it never happened. But my lips parted. A breath. A hesitation. I almost called out. Almost stopped him. I almost let it happen. But I didn't. Instead, I stood there in silence, watching as he reached for the door handle. He paused, just for a second. A glance over his shoulder. A question in his eyes. A final moment to decide. Then, without another word, he stepped out into the storm, and the door clicked shut behind him. I was alone again. But nothing felt the same. The next morning, I woke up with the weight of the night before pressing down on me like a stone. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him standing in the candlelight, his face unreadable, his words echoing in my mind. "I don't think he appreciates you the way he should." I turned over, staring at the empty space beside me. My husband's side of the bed was cold. He had come home late, as always. I must have been asleep, or at least pretending to be, by the time he crawled under the covers. Guilt gnawed at me, but it wasn't strong enough to drown out the other feeling. The one I didn't want to name. Longing. I hated how much I felt it. How much I wanted something I had no right to want. I tried to push it away. I went through my morning routine on autopilot, made coffee, packed lunches, answered my husband's distracted questions with distracted answers. But my thoughts weren't here. They were 2 doors down. I told myself I wouldn't see him today. That I'd make sure of it. That I'd stay inside, keep my head down, pretend nothing had changed. But fate had other plans. I stepped outside to take the trash out, and there he was. Standing by his car, keys in hand, about to leave. He saw me. I saw him. Neither of us moved. A beat passed. Maybe 2. Then he started walking toward me. I should have gone inside. Should have turned around and slammed the door behind me. But I didn't. I stood there, rooted to the spot as he closed the space between us, his eyes locked on mine, searching for something I wasn't sure I could give. He stopped just a breath away. Too close. Not close enough. "I thought about you last night," he said, his voice low. The words sent a shiver through me. I should have been angry. Should have told him this was wrong. But all I could think about was how much I had thought about him, too. I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but before I could, his hand lifted, fingers grazing the side of my face, featherlight. I should have pulled away, but I didn't. And then he kissed me. Soft at first. A hesitation, a question. Then deeper. Intense. Like he had been waiting for this. Like we both had. My body responded before my mind could catch up. My fingers gripped the front of his shirt, pulling him closer, like I had been starving for something I hadn't even realized I needed. For a few stolen seconds, nothing else existed. Not my marriage. Not my guilt. Not the life I had built. Only this. Only him. And then, the doorbell rang. I ripped myself away from him, breathless, heart pounding. My husband. I turned to the house, panic surging through me. My hands shook. My lips still tingled from the kiss. He took a step back, his face unreadable again. But this time, I knew what he was thinking. This was dangerous. And we had crossed a line we could never uncross. I opened my mouth to say something, to warn him, to ask him to stay, to beg him to leave. I didn't even know. But he didn't wait. He turned and walked away. And before I could catch my breath, before I could steady the wild thudding of my heart, I was opening the door to my husband. I stood at the door, my pulse still erratic, my lips still tingling, and yet I forced myself to breathe, forced my face into something that resembled normal. My husband stepped inside, shaking the rain from his jacket, the scent of his cologne filling the space between us. It used to be familiar, comforting. Now it felt foreign. I swallowed hard. "Hey," he said, his voice casual, like this was just another evening, another routine moment in a life that hadn't just been cracked open minutes ago. I nodded, managing a weak smile. "Hey." I tried to meet his eyes, but I couldn't. Because if I looked too long, he might see it. The guilt. The betrayal still fresh on my skin. I turned away under the pretense of taking his bag, of fixing something, anything, to keep my hands busy. He didn't notice. He never did. And maybe that was part of the problem. I went through the motions. Dinner. Small talk. Him scrolling through his phone, half listening, half existing in another world entirely. But I wasn't listening either. My mind was elsewhere. 2 doors down. I caught myself staring out the window more than once. Watching the house that wasn't mine. The one that held something forbidden. But he wasn't there. Not outside. Not in the driveway. Not where I could see him. A cold knot settled in my stomach. I told myself this was for the best. That what happened shouldn't have happened. That it couldn't happen again. But the worst part? The regret wasn't because I kissed him. The regret was because I wanted to do it again. I tried to push it down, to silence the voice in my head whispering what if? But then the next morning came. And he was gone. No glances. No lingering looks. No accidental meetings. Nothing. The tension hung thick in the air, suffocating in its silence. I told myself this was what I wanted. That distance was good. That space would erase what had happened. But when days passed and he still didn't so much as look in my direction, something inside me twisted. Because I missed it. I missed him. And that realization? That was the real betrayal. I replayed it over and over in my mind. The way his hand had brushed my face. The warmth of his lips. The way time had stopped, how for those few stolen seconds, nothing else had existed. I told myself it was just loneliness. That I had been vulnerable, caught up in a moment that never should have happened. That I had let my emotions, my needs, cloud my judgment. But if that was true, then why did it feel so much bigger than that? Why did I crave it? Why did the thought of never feeling that again make my chest ache in a way I couldn't explain? I turned over in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft, steady breathing beside me. My husband was fast asleep. I studied him, his features softened in the darkness, unaware of the storm raging inside me. Would he care if he knew? Really care? Or would it be more of an inconvenience? Another problem to fix, like a bill left unpaid or a task forgotten. I tried to remember the last time he had looked at me the way my neighbor had. The last time he had kissed me with anything close to that kind of urgency. The last time he had made me feel like I was more than just part of the routine. I couldn't. I turned away, gripping the sheets, my chest tight. I was at a crossroads. A choice I never thought I'd have to make. Should I confess? Lay it all out, watch the damage unfold, let the chips fall where they may? Should I leave? Walk away from this life, this marriage that had become more of an obligation than a partnership? Chase something uncertain, something reckless, something that made my heart pound the way it had that night? Or should I bury it? Pretend it never happened, pretend I hadn't felt what I felt, keep playing the role I had spent years perfecting? I closed my eyes, tried to sleep, tried to ignore the truth pressing down on me, suffocating me. No matter which choice I made, nothing would ever be the same again. I never thought I would be here, lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering how one moment, one decision, could shake the foundation of everything I thought I knew about myself. I wasn't the kind of woman who strayed. I wasn't reckless. I wasn't selfish. But maybe that was the lie I had told myself for too long. Because now I couldn't stop thinking about it. About him. The way he looked at me like I was seen, not just a wife, not just a mother, but a woman. A woman who was still alive beneath the routine, the obligations, the years of feeling unnoticed. And my husband? Still asleep. Still oblivious. I could tell him. I could end this right now, rip the bandage off, face the consequences. But what would that change? Would he fight for me? Would he even care? Or would he just be angry that his perfect little world had been disrupted? I don't know. And maybe that's the part that scares me the most. So now I have to ask you, what would you do in my place? Would you confess? Would you leave? Or would you bury it, pretend it never happened, and keep playing the role the world expects you to play? Have you ever felt trapped between loyalty and desire? Between who you are and who you want to be? Let's talk about this in the comments below. I want to know if I'm alone in this, or if you've ever felt it too. And if you want more shocking true stories like this, hit that subscribe button now. Because trust me, there's always more beneath the surface. They say storms pass. That after the rain, the sky clears and everything goes back to normal. But inside me, the storm is just beginning.